Hi, everyone. Good evening, or good morning, or good night, or good afternoon, from wherever you're tuning in from. We're Covenant Diaries. Thank you so much for joining us again on a special episode. I know last episode was special. We got to learn a lot about transparency, intimacy, and vulnerability with God. But we're going to take it to a different dimension in this particular episode. I believe we're currently on episode 8. And if you have not caught up, you're not all caught up with the episodes that we've released, what are you still waiting for? Are you really an OG if you haven't really caught up on all the episodes? But, anyways, if you haven't listened to other episodes, you can definitely get them on YouTube. We are Covenant Diaries on YouTube and also Covenant Diaries on a Spotify platform. And to be able to get links to those platforms, you can follow us on our Instagram page at Covenant Diaries on Instagram. And there is a link on our bio for our YouTube channel and our Spotify channel as well. So we do feel free to follow us on those platforms. And also, if you have any questions or concerns, definitely send us a DM or email us. Our email is also on our YouTube page and also on our Instagram. So send us an email, prayer request, whatever it may be. Okay, we're here for you guys. We've built a platform and community where we can be vulnerable and transparent with each other. So whatever be your concerns, definitely send us a DM. And down to the real gist. Before we start, I'm going to introduce to you guys, as always, our special guest. And by the way, as always, my sister Rebecca is here with me.
I'm the special guest.
Sorry, Pastor Eric. Becky is too much. I cannot. But yes, we have our special guest. Well, he's been here before. He's the first returning guest, actually. So we need to create an award for first time returning guests. If you haven't caught up on the first episode with Pastor Eric, I believe it's episode 4, where we interviewed Pastor Eric as a pastor's kid. But now he's coming in as a minister who's going to encourage all pastors' kids. So he's passed the interview and now he's back as a regular guest. So if you haven't watched that episode, please definitely listen to that episode. It's I learned a lot from that episode. I'm still yet to recover from that previous episode. And I'm praying, I'm believing God that this episode will be even much more of a greater blessings to you for the glory of God. And without further ado, please welcome our special guest again, who's no longer a visitor, but our brother, Pastor Eric.
Hey, glad to be back.
Yay! All right, today we're gonna be talking some about a really important topic to me. So I've been feeling the leading to discuss on the narrative of Job. You know, I recently was going through a lot of circumstances that I cannot really go into details as yet, but it made me really think about Job in the Bible. When Job was going through a lot of afflictions, he got one bad news after the other. And for some weird reason, there was always one person who survived to be able to tell the negative story, which is something, a different story for another day. But he kept on getting negative stories after another. First, his field caught on fire, all his possessions and everything that he owned caught on fire. Then it was his children, then it was his livestock, all his workers, the shepherds who were guiding the sheep, all of them died. Everything that he ever earned or was blessed with, he lost all of them in one day. And in that moment, I don't know about how many people would be able to have that same confession that Job had when he was pressed against the wall. when he felt like he was pushed back against the wall, he made such a profound statement that I'm still even processing and thinking, like, are the Christians in this generation up to that level of having that affirmation and trust and full confidence in God that even if you slay me, yet I will still hope in you. Let's go to that scripture because I want to read it word for word so we can be able to understand exactly the narrative that I'm speaking on. So it's in Job 13 from verses 15. We're going to go to Job 13 verses 15. I want to read this word for word as he says. I'm reading from the New Living Translation. It says, God might kill me, but I have no other hope. I am going to argue my case with him. But this is what will save me. I am not godless. If I were, I could not stand before him. Let me read it in a different translation. I want to get that translation that says, even if you slay me. The New King James translation says that, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Even so, I will defend my own ways before him. Now, just to clarify, way back in the Old Testament time, right? Their understanding of God was not it was not fully developed as we didn't have a deeper understanding of God as we do right now. In their understanding back then, every good thing comes from God and also every bad thing. So sometimes when bad things happen, you would see in some scriptures where it says, "If spirit from the Lord does not send evil spirit," but they didn't really have any that deep concept or understanding of the activities of Satan and or the devil. So they believed at that moment that good and bad came from God. But we know that all good and perfect gifts comes from God. However, God sometimes does let the enemy afflict people. Sometimes people give themselves into the affliction of the enemy, and sometimes God allows trials like that to come to test our faith in Him. He does not send them. To clarify, God does not send afflictions. He does not tempt us, but He tries our faith. He allows afflictions to come to try our faith and test our faith in Him. And one important thing that I wanted you to know, that even though that the enemy afflicted the life of Job, the Lord instructed the devil to not touch his life because God is the owner of life. I wanted to give that clarification because I know sometimes people would get all like, "Oh, like how can God send bad things and blah blah blah." Blah." But that was the understanding in the Old Testament. But we know now that God, every good and perfect gift comes from God. But in some cases, God does allow things to happen to people to test their faith and try their faith. And we'll find out eventually, sometimes, what the result of those trials would lead to. Going straight into it, there are three people that I would love to bring their narrative on, and Pastor Eric would also bring his own narrative on whatever person, his favorite person in the Bible that he wanted to talk about, or probably give us a different, whole, completely, entirely different narrative from this. But the beauty of this podcast is that we all have different way that we understand things and see things. The beauty of perception is that it brings liberation. Hearing things from a different point of view brings a lot of eye-opening event and makes you see things in a different way. And it would strengthen faith, it would encourage people. But to my favorite people, okay, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite ones that really takes this whole narrative deeper. Like I did mention the narrative of Job. The other person that I wanted to mention in this case, where he was very persistent, even though he was faced with a lot of difficult situations he was faced with. In the face of that, he still made this statement. He still stood in his conviction. What really worries me in this generation is that I don't see that there's a lot of Christians who are really to that point that they're dead to self, that they're willing to give up everything for the Lord. It's very common in third world countries where people would get persecuted, a church could get burned down, but guess what? You will still see people return back to church the following Sunday. But in the Western world, God forbid anything happens in a church, I don't know how many people are going to return back the following Sunday. It's a whole completely different. It makes me wonder if we're all serving the same God. While we have the privilege that we have a freedom of religion and we have the freedom to express our faith in who we believe in, even though people take it to the extreme of believing in like the randomest things. I'm like, people can choose a tree to be their god. I'm like, and that's freedom of religion. But we who know the truth that there is only one God and there is only one way to be saved through Jesus Christ, we have that so much freedom and power because we have a God who controls the whole, like, who owns the whole universe, like who created everything. If anything, we should be the ones, right, who are more bolder, who are more courageous, who are more fearless, because we have one who has the ultimate power. But it sometimes feels like it is those who are serving things that are not powerful, that are limited, things that they created in their own hands, that have more faith in that thing when that thing cannot save them. But we who have God who can always save, sometimes it feels like we're a little shaky in our belief. I wonder why that is. But today, I pray and hope that this podcast or this episode will really challenge your faith in God, would really be a catalyst to like strengthen your faith in God and push you to really evaluate where you stand with God, why you're not willing to go fully surrender fully to God, why you're not willing to go the extra mile with God. What exactly is holding you back? I'm praying that you would have that self-evaluation today when you listen to this. What is that particular thing that is making you afraid of surrendering completely to God? What is it that is making you feel like when you're faced with even the littlest setback, you just ditch God? You completely just be like, I can't do this no more. If this is what Christianity means, I'm out. Why is it that, what is it that is making you afraid of fully submitting to God? Are you afraid of people's perception of you? Are you afraid that you're going to be persecuted? Are you afraid that people would think that you're too fanatic or you're too psychotic or you're just too obsessed with this person called Jesus? Would you think that people will call you a weirdo? I'm wondering what exactly would be that setback, that limitation that is making you not commit wholly and fully and surrender fully to God. And I'm back to the person that I was going to talk about before I went off tangent, well, which was necessary. John the Baptist. We call him, excuse me, sorry, we call him the forerunner of Jesus. He was there to prepare the way for the Lord Jesus' coming, right? And we see how significant his ministry was in people knowing Jesus Christ. Even some of his disciples went to be the disciples of Jesus Christ as well. And we find that he was very bold in his faith, in his statement of who he believes in. He was a very, very radical preacher. I'm yet to see one preacher who was as radical as John the Baptist, literally speaking his mind, not afraid of the consequences. he saw King Herod at the time, who married his brother's wife, and he blatantly told him that's a sin. You cannot do that. Obviously, the king was so furious. Like, who does this guy think he is, telling me what to do? Of course, he was not. He wasn't able to kill him at that point because he was afraid of what the disciples of John the Baptist were going to do to him. He was more terrified of what they were going to do. So, although he was like brewing hatred and like, I cannot stand this man, but he couldn't do anything. However, on the side of John the Baptist, his faith was tested. He was arrested, sent into prison for what he for speaking against the king eventually. But one day when it was the king's birthday, his daughter danced in a way that pleased him, and he made a vow that he would give his daughter anything that she requested for dancing so beautifully on his birthday. And if we understand the way rulership was back then, you know how the scripture says where the word of the king is, there is power. Literally, that's what it implies. When the king says something, that's what it's going to be. So, because he's made that vow before everyone that he would give his daughter anything that she requested, because of the way that she had honored him and danced before him. And obviously, this was an opportunity for his wife, or his brother's his wife that he took as his wife. She saw an opportunity to get John killed, and she told the daughter, when he asks you what you want, now you tell your daddy that we need the head of John the Baptist. Because King Herod had already made that promise and vow to give anything that the daughter had requested, and he couldn't go back to it. When she did make the request of the head of John the Baptist on a tree, he had no choice than to have John the Baptist killed in the prison. Now, let's try to imagine being in the shoes of John the Baptist, hearing that you're going to get killed because of standing up for the truth, saying what is right. Because obviously he was in the prison for that reason. And then being in the prison, obviously it ended in him dying. What would go through your mind in that moment? Would you renounce your faith at that moment as you're going to be beheaded? In that moment, would you say that everything that you said was a lie just to be cool before everyone? It's a hard thing to picture, if you're not in that shoes. It's so hard to imagine that, especially in the difference of how things are in the society. But it's something for us to think about. When you say that you are serving God and you're faced with a lot of adversities, are you blaming everything on God, or are you trusting the process? Are you trusting his will and his plan for your life? It's something for us to think about. Now I'm gonna give the mic to Pastor Eric to bring his own narrative. Evan is
Well,
blaming.
well, I think you raise some great observations there, and this is a subject that I've actually been thinking about for quite a few months now.
Hmm.
Actually started dealing with this topic since I would say since around November of 2024. And as I ponder this, I wonder in my own life, what does this look like in my own life? You
Mm-hmm.
know, um, the thing is that if we start from Job, right? I,
Yeah.
I have some I have some problems
Mm-hmm.
with Job 13:15, right? Now, if you do the scholarly work, you would understand that there's some controversy amongst that statement,
Mhm.
right? In terms of what's there in the ancient writing and from where it's translated. But when I look at the connotation of what Job is doing here and what he is saying, I sometimes wonder, you know, what was Job's real intention there,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, Job wasn't trying to make a statement to us today,
Yeah.
right? What Job was trying to do was get back at his hot-headed friends, right? Simply put, Job was getting ticked off with what his friends, or so-called friends, were saying to him and accusing him of. And, in a you could almost say that in a sarcastic tone, he says, "Well, even if God were to slay me, I
Yeah.
would still put my hope in him,"
Mhm.
right? But when you look at that, what gets me is that second part of that verse where it says, "Yet," and I'm reading in the ESV, "Yet I will argue my ways to his face." And I'm like, Job, dude, come on, man. What is that?
But he's
Right?
being realistic though, you know?
He's being realistic,
Yeah.
but he's also being really cocky, right? But if you want to be real and realistic, I can draw the same parallel to Gen Z's, alphas, and even millennials today.
Mm.
A lot of them are just cocky when it comes to God.
Yeah.
A lot of them are willing to just say, "Hey, I'll challenge God to his face." I mean, look at what we see in media. You know, I don't know how you can say, "Hey, I have a third sex," without challenging God to his face,
Mhm. Oof.
right? This, to me, is where Job struggled, but he didn't realize he was struggling.
Mm.
And it's where I see a lot of young people struggle with the fact of, I have something to prove.
Yeah.
Job felt he had to prove himself to his friends. Job knew he did nothing wrong.
Yeah.
Job Job was right. He was right. But this whole argument here is him trying to defend himself to his friends who were trying to convince him he was wrong. And in a moment of frustration, he utters this statement that even if God were to kill me, I would still put my hope in him so that I could make my case directly to him. And Job had the assumption that God would vindicate him.
In other words, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was gonna say in the contemporary words, it would be like whatever happens, like do your worst, like regardless, whatever, however bad it gets, whatever worst could happen, I would still trust God and I would still be able to prove my case to Him.
Right. In a sense, he was saying, well, it doesn't matter if God kills me right now. I would still go to heaven and I would make the case that I'm right. Think about that for a second. What does that remind you of?
I don't know if to push it down to the idea of being self righteous, you know.
That's exactly it.
I
That's exactly it. That, to me, that's what I see there. That there's that hint of self-righteousness. So what does that tell me, right? That shows me a lot in Job's life. We kind of come into this connotation of Job that Job was pretty much perfect.
That's how the Bible described him as an upright man.
It said he was an upright man, didn't say he was a perfect man, because my Bible only describes one person as being perfect,
That's true.
right? You can be upright, but still have some self-righteousness in you,
Mm,
right? Well, what was God doing here, right? And this is my theory. That I'm not saying this is theology. I believe God was silent the whole time, right? The
mm.
whole time, every time Job tried to call God out, God would stay silent
You actually,
until. Mhm.
you're literally speaking on the other notes that I had on here, but go ahead. I'll repeat. I made
God
that in my book, but
God stayed silent until he exposed what needed to be exposed in Job's life,
mm,
right? Because if you skip to the end of Job, when you get to like chapter 38 and so on, and down to the end of the book, what does God do? When God speaks, God puts Job in his place and humbles Job,
mhm.
right? So if Job didn't need humbling, why would God have to humble him?
So, following up with what you said, it's literally like it's written up from my note, but this is like the spirit is one. But it goes back to when you mentioned that, it makes me think about when he was making all of this statement. And obviously, I mean, let's be real, his friends were really pushing his buttons because everything that they did there since they came was accusing him. There must be a sin in your life because God doesn't afflict the righteous, blah 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 blah, blah. They did not understand that even though that good gifts comes from God, the devil also afflicts righteous people, right? And then they were like, oh, there must be some sin in your life because if there's sin in your life, then it means that you're going through what you're going through. It's something that people would say now when they see bad things happen to pastor's kids or bad things happen to the pastor's family. Oh, they're probably not living their life right. That's probably why all of this is going on. But anyways, I digress.
I
How?
think that's a really great and valid point, because I look at these friends as if they're coming to kind of hold Job down, right? They're coming to say, "Hey, you're not as perfect as or upright as you pretend to be,"
Yeah, you're living a fake life.
right? And sometimes that could be one of the faces of a PK,
Yeah.
right? you know, there's some of us who, we go off the deep end and we just go the rebellious route. Then there's some who are trying to do the right thing, trying to live right, trying to have a relationship with God, but yet you're held to that magnifying glass where everyone is looking for just a little bit of dirt they can on you to say, yes, you see, you're not as good as you think you are. You're not as perfect or as holy or upright as you
Oh,
think they are. And that's kind of how I see what these friends are doing to Joe.
yeah. I love where this is going. But anyways, when he was making all of those self-righteous profession, obviously we know, and all of the things that he was saying, how exactly did God respond to Job's questions? He was asking Job's a lot of questions, but we all know that when God did respond, it's like saying that if even if he was to ask Job 1,000 questions, if he was to ask man 1,000 questions, man would not be able to answer one. But how did God respond exactly to Job's question? Like Pastor Eric mentioned, there was an initial silence, right? I mean, think about it. God is such a good father and a patient father. He was silent to let Job take out everything that is in his chest. Sometimes when we say that we're in a waiting season and God is silent, even though he's silent, look within you. What is coming out from you in the moment of God's silence? What he's silent as he is watching your heart content in that pruning season. What are you saying out of your mouth when God is silent? When you're waiting and you're requesting God for a particular thing, you're presenting this particular prayer request to God, and it seems like nothing is happening. Literally no show. What are you saying in that moment? How is your attitude towards God when He is silent, when you pray to Him? What do you usually say? Are you blaming everything on God, or what are you really saying to God? What is your heart revealing? Because in the moment of that silence, our heart content is revealed. Are you angry at God when He's silent? Are you kind of rebellious in that moment? Oh, if He's not going to talk to me, why should I work for Him? If He's not going to answer my request, why should I keep serving Him? Why should I keep serving in the church? Why should I keep talking about God to other people when He's not even responding to my request? He's not even answering me. It's not even like He's there. God allowed Job to vent. And it goes back to what we mentioned in the last episode: transparency and vulnerability. I think with God, with relationship with God, God wants intimacy with Him such that you're free to tell Him everything that is in your heart. Not that He doesn't already know. He already know the content of your heart. But you saying it to Him, one, it is telling you, when you're saying things from your heart, your mind is also paying attention to, if you're really honest with yourself, your heart, what you're speaking will tell what exactly is in your heart. Is it showing that you're very rebellious in nature? Whatever is coming out of your heart when you're frustrated, when what you are desiring is not being granted, do you throw out a tantrum, a spiritual tantrum? Do you backslide in that moment? Do you stop following God? Are you really transparent and vulnerable to God that, oh, I know that I've been praying, I've been asking you of this so many times, but I don't understand why I'm going through what I'm going through? Are you being real to tell God that I feel really frustrated in this waiting season? I feel like really giving up. I feel like nothing is really happening, but I really, even though I don't feel like going forward, moving forward, I feel like I just want you to help me and give me the grace to trust in you. Are you being vulnerable to Him, or are you feeling like you got it all when you don't really got nothing? Do you feel like you're hiding a lot of things from God in that moment when He's silent? That's something I want us to think about. And then the other way that God responded is, after He was silent, it was God revealing Himself to Job, right? Even though that God did not offer an explanation to Job's suffering or answer his questions, but He did reveal His power and His wisdom. It's more, that shows to me that it's so important to know who God is than trying to understand His ways or His plans. Because in our time of wait, we like to want to rationalize things because it's that part of human nature to exert control, to have control over situations. I think that's really the breaking point of a lot of Christians. When they're not able to control things, when they're not able to understand what's going on, in that moment is where the breaking point is. Is that moment going to refine their character as a Christian, or is it going to take them back to the world? And it shows if they really are going to mature as a Christian, or they're going to just fade out. It shows that whatever seed that was planted in them was probably not rooted. In that moment of waiting, in that moment where you're going through a lot of trials, in that moment where everything is just falling apart, it's like, I see it that, this, there was a time where there was this viral test of trust where people are asked to fall and see if they trust the other person to catch them. I kind of see it spiritually as us when we're going through a lot of afflictions. Are we willing to just take our hands out of trying to control the situation and just like fall straight in the arms of God, trusting that He would hold us as we're just like relaxing in His hands? Or are we trying to hold on to our own rope, hanging on to it because we don't trust that God is going to catch us when we fall? You know, like I said, it's very important to know God more than trying to rationalize why you're going through what you're going through, or trying to understand what God is doing in that moment. We can never understand the ways of God. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. So it's something that I've come to understand, that instead of really trying to make sense of everything, or trying to, because sometimes when we understand something, it gives us a sense of comfort or hope in what we believe to be the answer. But when we don't know, when we don't understand something, that's a test of humility, if we're going to accept what we don't understand and trust God, or trying to rely on our own understanding, right? And then the third way that God responded was through restoration. So we don't know why exactly Job had to go through what he went through, but we know that he did have a happy ending. Everything was restored. His family was restored. His business was restored. His possessions was restored. But my question back to us all as Christians, whoever is hearing this, if we go back to the narrative of John the Baptist, where it was not a happy ending, what happens to your faith when things doesn't end well? But also remember that the most important thing that you should keep in mind is that your heart posture towards God when you're going through what you're going through, because the life that we live here on earth is temporal. We should be so in tune with God and trusting in God, such that even when life is no more here on earth, we have that confidence that we will still see God in heaven when that comes, right? So maybe that's probably the root of fear, why people do not fully give everything to God. Maybe there's that fear that they don't have that good relationship with God for God to really, have their back. They don't think that God cares about them. They don't think that God loves them, or they don't think that they're going to be with God in eternity. And so they don't feel fully persuaded to stand up for God, to stand up for the word of God, or to stand up for their Christian faith in God. Maybe there's that fear that, oh, if I probably die now, I'm probably not going to go to heaven. So what's the point? So what exactly is keeping you back from submitting fully to God? Yeah, that's something that we need to think about and ponder about.
Well, there's a couple of things I can point out, as to what you're saying.
Mm,
When God finally does speak to Job,
yeah,
God questions Job,
yeah,
right?
mm,
And says to Job, "Well, where were you
when I
when
created
the
it.
earth? Yeah, where were you? Right?
Yeah,
Where was your self righteousness then?
for reals.
Right?" And you know what God is showing here is that my interpretation is this: that God is sovereign,
That's right. He's God.
and the whole time Job is expecting God to vindicate him,
Hmm.
right? But why? He was expecting God to vindicate it to his friends to prove them wrong.
Mm,
What happens when our expectations of God clashes with the reality of who God is?
word.
When we expect God to do something in our way or on our behalf, but then God has to remind us, hey, I'm sovereign. I don't work according to your will, you work according to mine. That's why he says, seek ye first the kingdom. Seek ye first the kingdom,
Hmm.
and all these things will be added unto you. Right? The
Yeah.
the problem here is that even as mature believers, we can fall into this trap
Yeah, it's not
of
easy.
saying, "Hey, I expect God when I'm going through this. I expect God to do this."
Hmm.
Right? That's all well and good, but God is sovereign. God will do what God will do,
That's true.
right? And I don't say that to negate what someone is going through or to diminish a problem.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with sickness, when you're dealing with loss, you're dealing with grief, you're dealing with, financial instability and all these things. I mean, you could feel like your world is crumbling, and I completely understand that,
Yeah.
you know, but God is God. And I think, that's where it had to get real for Job. You say that Job had a happy ending. To me, I don't think that was a happy ending, because you use the word restoration, but that word restoration implies that there was loss.
Mm.
Job lost his kids. Yeah, he got more, but he lost his kids.
Yeah. Nothing obviously can compare to that loss, obviously, but I say happy ending in a sense that even though like it felt like everything all was crumbling down and everything was all, it seemed like he was in a dark tunnel, right?
Hmm.
Happy ending in the sense that everything was beautiful again. Everything was perfect again. And I'm sure that from my experience with God, when God restores something, he restores it better than it was before, from my own experience. And that's my own journey with God. Because he said in his word that he will restore the years that the locusts have eaten, the cankerworms and the caterpillars have destroyed. And also he said that the latter shall be greater than the former. So I
Hmm.
wouldn't think that God restoring would restore it in the same magnitude that it was before. There has to be something better and greater, because that's the God that we worship. No matter how much struggles or no matter how you waited or the trials that you went through, when God restores something in your life, it's never the same way as the blessing that you originally had. It's 10 times better, because that's the good God that we serve. He never gives it the same way that it was before. There has to be something better that you would never remember, almost not even remember the pain that you went through.
Because that restoration is not human restoration. That
Mm,
restoration is based on God's sovereignty. It is based on who God is, right? Man's restoration says, well, okay, you lost this, now you can replace it with this, right? I recently was, uh, someone was sharing a story of, you know, they were facing the loss of their newborn child,
oh my God.
and the doctor said, well, you're young, you can have more. That's man's idea of restoration. Well, you lost it, you
You
can
know,
get it back. But
when
thankfully, that's not how God views restoration.
exactly. I think I kind of know where you're going with that. Taking it deeper in that lane that you're heading to. Restoration, not only that it was physical, but there was internal healing and restoration, spiritual restoration as well. Because
Exactly.
sometimes we see things, in the physical realm. A lot of us go through. Let me backtrack a little bit. Even though we see physical trials and temptations or whatnot, we're not neglecting the internal battles that people go through in their mind, right? When God restores, when God restores, He brings healing to your mind, to your soul, that it appears that you never went through any mental attack or any internal struggles, right? So, restoration in that sense, not only just physical, but healing also in the mind, that even as your soul prospers, right? That deep healing spiritually, reconciliation with God, restoration, way more healing than what it was before. So even though that all around you is well and all around you is better again than it was before, but also when people go through wars and spiritual attacks, there is also a bruise in their mind. There is also a bruise in their walk with God. They get bruised in their journey with God. So when God does visit them physically, financially, He also heals that part of them that was bruised, that part of their faith in Him that was bruised. He also heals them by reassuring them, I'm here for you. I want you to know that I'm restoring everything because I was never gone. I am here for you, my daughter. I am here for you, my son. That thing that you went through got nothing on you because I'm